With a single smile, Julia Roberts became America's sweetheart. The luminous face of Pretty Woman and the first actress in history to command a $20 million paycheck. Her laughter lit up theaters around the world, defining an entire era of Hollywood charm. But behind that radiant grin was a silence few ever heard. A childhood fractured by loss, a love life haunted by betrayal, and a sister's final cry that still echoes in whispers of guilt and grief. How did the woman who seemed to have everything end up hiding behind walls of solitude? And what truth has Julia Roberts spent decades protecting from the world's gaze? This video will uncover the untold story. The hidden chapters of fame, heartbreak, and survival. Behind Hollywood's brightest smile. Long before the world knew her as the queen of romantic comedies, Julia Roberts was just a little girl from Smyrna, Georgia. A girl who learned too early that love could disappear overnight. When she was 4, her parents' marriage collapsed, leaving behind a home filled with arguments and unpaid bills instead of lullabies. Her father, Walter, the gentle dreamer who once ran a small acting workshop, moved out. Within a few short years, cancer took him away for good. Julia was 10, and old enough to understand that goodbyes sometimes mean forever. Her mother, Betty Lou, remarried a man named Michael Moats, a decision that turned the house even colder. Friends later recalled that Moats ruled with temper and pride, while Julia's mother, exhausted and broke, tried to keep everything from falling apart. In that house, love became a currency she had to earn by being quiet, polite, perfect. The seed of her famous smile was planted here. Not as joy, but as armor. Her brother Eric escaped first, diving into acting and rebellion in equal measure. He would later admit, "I was exhausting to be around. Blamey, angry." For Julia, his chaos was both warning and prophecy. The Roberts home became a stage of tension. A mother chasing stability, a father's absence like a ghost, and children learning that affection could vanish with one wrong move. Julia began to retreat into imagination. She watched the world through the window of her small room, whispering lines from movies she couldn't yet audition for. Acting wasn't just ambition, it was escape. A way to rewrite the script of her own life. When people later marveled at her natural warmth on screen, they didn't know it was forged from cold. That warmth was the light she built for herself when no one else kept the fire burning. Behind the sweet Georgia accent and shy eyes was a girl who'd already lost too much and promised herself never to need anyone again. That vow would carry her to Hollywood. But it would also become the invisible wound that every love, every success, and every heartbreak in her future would trace back to. Hollywood didn't just open its gates for Julia Roberts. It devoured her whole. When she arrived in Los Angeles in the late 1980s, she wasn't the polished star people now imagine. She was a 20-year-old with wild curls, thrift store dresses, and a defiant belief that her broken past could somehow be rewritten beneath studio lights. Her earliest roles in Satisfaction 1988 and Mystic Pizza 1988 didn't make her rich, but they introduced something rare. A kind of raw sincerity that cameras couldn't fake. Directors began to whisper about her movie star eyes. In Watch as Fast As, Inspection, then came Steel Magnolias 1989. At 21, she played Shelby, a fragile young woman fighting to live her life despite her illness. The performance earned her first Oscar nomination, and audiences wept not just for Shelby, but for the truth behind the performance, the real-life girl who had already known loss far too early. Suddenly, Hollywood had a new obsession. A southern ingenue with a smile that sold dreams and a vulnerability that sold tickets. Pretty Woman 1990 changed everything. Overnight, Julia Roberts became a global phenomenon. The film grossed over $460 million worldwide, and that smile? wide, unstoppable, seemingly invincible, became a cultural emblem. She was crowned America's sweetheart, though no one asked what it cost to wear that title. With each new role, Sleeping with the Enemy, Notting Hill, My Best Friend's Wedding, Runaway Bride, Julia built an empire of lightness while privately carrying the heaviness of being the product itself. Hollywood wanted Julia to be accessible, adorable, eternally sunny. But Julia Roberts, the woman, was complex. Thoughtful, fiercely private, and distrustful of fame's price tag. When tabloids began to hound her, spinning every friendship into a romance, she learned to disappear in plain sight. She rarely gave interviews. When she did, her answers were careful, rehearsed. A performance within a performance. She knew that one wrong word could shatter the illusion. The irony of her career was cruel. To maintain her reign, she had to surrender her truth. The woman who once vowed never to need anyone now lived in a world where everyone needed something from her. Producers, agents, journalists, fans. She smiled for cameras, but behind closed doors, she was shrinking. You can be adored by millions, she would later say, and still feel completely alone. When the Fres Publis, her personal life became a mirror of her professional one. Dazzling on the surface, chaotic underneath. During the Flatliner shoot, she began dating Kiefer Sutherland, a Hollywood prince with his own demons. The romance burned fast and bright, feeding gossip columns daily. They were young, famous, and reckless. The perfect Hollywood storm. But the closer the wedding approached, the more Julia seemed to pull away. On the 14th of June, 1991, just 3 days before the ceremony, she vanished. The world called her the runaway bride long before the movie ever existed. To the press, it was scandal. To Julia, it was survival. She fled to Ireland, hiding from the noise, from the betrayal, from herself. It wasn't just about a man, it was about control. Reclaiming the only thing fame hadn't yet taken, her choice. When she returned, she carried a new kind of strength. Colder, wiser. She took roles that mirrored that transformation. Women who ran, women who refused to be owned, women who smiled while quietly rebelling. The same smile that once made her famous now became her disguise. A wall built brick by brick to protect what was left of her real self. By the mid-1990 seconds, Julia Roberts was no longer chasing fame. Fame was chasing her. She was the first woman to command $20 million per film, a number unheard of for actresses at the time. But with that paycheck came the heaviest kind of loneliness. The realization that she had become a brand more than a person. She could buy privacy, but not peace. Every success deepened the paradox. The brighter her star, the darker her nights. In public, Julia laughed. On magazine covers, she glowed. But off camera, she sought silence. Meditation, solitude, the ocean. She stopped attending Hollywood parties, preferring to read scripts alone. "I need space to remember who I am," she once confessed to a friend. That quiet rebellion, the refusal to let the industry define her, was the greatest risk of all. Julia Roberts had conquered Hollywood. But in doing so, she had to amputate the very thing that made her human. Her vulnerability. The woman who once dreamed of escaping pain had built an empire that depended on pretending it never existed. By the time Julia Roberts became the highest paid actress in the world, she had already mastered the art of running. From roles that trapped her, from relationships that suffocated her, from any life that resembled permanence. Love, for her, was a battlefield disguised as a fairy tale. Every headline, every paparazzi flash seemed to remind her that intimacy came with a contract she never signed. Her romance with Kiefer Sutherland was Hollywood's obsession. The golden couple of the early 90 seconds. But behind closed doors, the chemistry that had electrified flatliners began to curdle. Sutherland's nightlife, rumors of infidelity, and an industry hungry for gossip turned affection into suspicion. Julia, who had spent her childhood navigating the volatility of adults, recognized the same storm brewing again. 3 days before their lavish wedding, she vanished, leaving Kiefer, the guests, and the tabloids stunned. She boarded a flight to Ireland with Jason Patrick, Kiefer's close friend, seeking quiet but finding scandal. The media called it treachery. Julia called it self-preservation. For the first time, she chose flight over compliance, even if it meant becoming a villain in the public eye. She ran because she couldn't breathe, one friend later said. The world wrote her off as the runaway bride long before the movie script ever existed. But for Julia, it wasn't rebellion. It was survival instinct, sharpened by years of watching people she loved fall apart. Her next attempt at love came with country singer Lyle Lovett. They married in 1993 after knowing each other just weeks. A union that baffled Hollywood. The press mocked his awkward looks, dubbing them Beauty and the Beast. Julia ignored the noise, declaring she had finally found calm. But fame followed her into that quiet Texas marriage. Paparazzi helicopters circled their honeymoon ranch. Gossip columns timed every public kiss. Within 2 years, the marriage dissolved, politely but inevitably. It wasn't betrayal this time, just exhaustion. What no one saw was how these failed loves hollowed her. On screen, she could play warmth effortlessly, but off screen, she began to lose faith in connection itself. Every heartbreak taught her the same lesson. Fame made love a public sport, and she was always the one bleeding on the field. Then came Danny Motter, the man who would ignite her most controversial chapter. He was a cameraman on The Mexican, 2000, quiet, kind, grounded. Everything Hollywood wasn't. But Danny was married, and the tabloids smelled blood before either of them said a word. When he filed for divorce from his wife, Vera Steinberg, and married Julia weeks later in 2002, headlines exploded with accusations: homewrecker, husband stealer, the smile that shattered another woman's life. Julia, cornered once again by judgment, responded not with words but with wardrobe. Wearing a t-shirt emblazoned "Aloe Vera." It was part humor, part defiance, and all pain. That shirt became a symbol of fury, of frustration, of a woman tired of being dissected. In one photograph, she smiles, but her eyes reveal exhaustion, as if the cost of defending her own love had drained what little innocence she had left. Later, she would tell people that Danny had sorted his life out separate and apart from me. But by then, perception had already decided her fate. The irony was cruel. The woman who brought love stories to life for millions could not find a version of it untouched by scandal. To the world, Julia Roberts was still the radiant heroine. To herself, she was a witness to her own undoing. A participant in a cycle of devotion and damage she couldn't seem to escape. Still, somewhere within that chaos, there was defiance. Each heartbreak stripped her of illusions, but gave her a deeper clarity. She began retreating from Hollywood's chaos, trading premieres for privacy, red carpets for family dinners. Danny became her sanctuary, her rebellion against the idea that women in Hollywood couldn't have both love and autonomy. Yet, even in peace, the echoes of betrayal lingered. The hurt of being misunderstood, the burden of being mythologized. Julia had run from so many storms, only to realize that some followed her from within. And as the cameras continued to chase her, she finally learned that not all wars are fought in public. Some happen quietly, in the spaces between forgiveness and regret. The tragedy that Julia Roberts never acted in was the one life wrote for her. For decades, she had kept her private world sealed behind composure and grace, mastering the art of being seen without being known. But even the strongest walls crack under the weight of unspoken pain. And in 2014, the fracture came from within her own family. Her half-sister, Nancy Moats, was found dead in Los Angeles, a victim of an apparent overdose of prescription drugs and drowning. She was 37. The coroner's report called it suicide. The tabloids called it a scandal. But for Julia, it was something far crueler. The collapse of the fragile bond she had spent years trying to repair. Nancy had publicly criticized her famous sister in tweets that dripped with bitterness. Do you want to be a fan of someone so cruel? She's not even that good of an actress. Those words, printed in headlines across the world, became a wound that no Oscar, no role, no smile could conceal. To the public, it was another Hollywood tragedy. To Julia, it was an echo of her childhood. A replay of loss, guilt, and silence. Once again, someone she loved was gone, and she was left to navigate the aftermath alone, under the merciless gaze of the press. She did not grant interviews, did not make statements, did not defend herself. When asked years later how she survived that period, she simply said, "When you're in pain, you get quiet." End quote. In the Fano Cuded, that silence became her form of mourning, her therapy, her rebellion against the machine that demanded emotional performance even in grief. She retreated into anonymity, living quietly with her husband Danny Motor and their 3 children in Taos, New Mexico. The woman who had once conquered the world now sought salvation in the simplest routines: sunrise, coffee, meditation, gardening, raising children far from the red carpets that once defined her. She had learned the cost of visibility, and she no longer wanted to pay it. Yet, even in withdrawal, Julia's legacy evolved. The industry that once idolized her began to shift. New generations of actresses cited her as a blueprint. Not for perfection, but for survival. She had endured a Hollywood that rewarded charm and punished truth, and she had lived long enough to outlast its appetite for her pain. Her later interviews revealed a woman transformed. In 2022, she told Vanity Fair, "I think I've been called difficult, but it's mostly because I'm protective of my peace." It was a quiet confession, a message not of arrogance, but of boundaries. Julia had learned that preservation is a form of resistance. The same woman who once smiled through heartbreak now understood that the most radical thing she could do was to stop performing. But her story's revelation wasn't just personal, it was generational. Julia Roberts became a mirror for the silent epidemic of emotional exhaustion in women who live their lives under constant expectation. To be gentle, forgiving, flawless. Behind the perfect smiles of millions of mothers, wives, and daughters is the same quiet ache, the need to be enough without needing to please. Julia embodied that paradox in every frame. The woman whose laughter healed others while she herself was breaking inside. For years, Hollywood tried to cast her downfall as scandal, but the real story was slower, subtler. The erosion of self that comes from being loved for an image rather than a soul. When the camera stopped rolling, Julia didn't implode like so many others. She simply stepped back, letting the noise die out until the world realized she had been whispering something profound all along. Survival doesn't always look triumphant. Sometimes it looks like stillness. In her later years, that stillness became her power. She took fewer roles, choosing only stories that reflected maturity and grace. Eat, Pray, Love, Wonder, Ben is Back. All meditations on healing, motherhood, and redemption. They weren't just performances, they were messages. Through them, Julia dismantled her own myth from the inside, showing that the woman behind America's Sweetheart was human, flawed, and searching for peace like everyone else. And maybe that's why her legend endures. Julia Roberts' greatest act was not the rom-coms that made her famous, but the quiet courage of walking away from the applause when it no longer fed her. She never succumbed to the destructive addictions that swallowed so many of her peers. No pills, no rehabs, no spirals. Her self-destruction was invisible, emotional, and profoundly human. The exhaustion of being adored for the wrong reasons. If fame was her poison, then solitude became her antidote. In that silence, she rebuilt herself. Not as a star, but as a person who learned to smile for real. Today, when she appears in interviews, there's a softness to her voice, an absence of defense. She speaks like someone who has made peace with the ghosts that once haunted her. And maybe that is the revelation, that the woman once accused of running away had finally stopped running. She found her sanctuary not in fame, not in love, not even in forgiveness, but in understanding that sometimes survival itself is a masterpiece. The truth, then, is not about what destroyed Julia Roberts, but what didn't. In a city that consumes its own stars, she refused to burn. She simply dimmed the lights, took a step back, and taught the world that there is beauty, even in the quiet aftermath of pain.